picking it up, moving over.
Yeah.
You notice all the hard hats on the job. Those guys swinging those hatchets,
Nobody got hurt though, did they?
they didn't say anybody did.
I
And so, you know, just again, a matter of time, cost, quality, and safety. What are you willing to give up? But it's a fun video to watch. I've always enjoyed that video.
You like how he walks like that?
Yeah, that bucket walking with the taper is my favorite part of the whole thing. Something to learn there. Okay, any other questions on bar charts or general stuff so far? Okay, next step is we'll talk about CFM network systems. Now, what we mean by a CFM network, so you have kind of an idea of where we're going, is a schedule that's in this format. Okay? A little different than a bar chart. Does that help to have these front lights off?
Yes.
Okay. So now, as you look at this schedule, we're going to put the schedule into a flowchart format. How many of you, is this the first time you've seen a schedule for construction operations in this kind of a flowchart format? Okay, most of you. You know what's really interesting to me is I do training for the National Center of Construction Education and Research. NCCER is called. It's a national organization that consists of AGC, ABC members, subcontracting members. They're all commercial. We don't get any residential folks coming to this. They're all commercial project managers and superintendents. We've been doing this for about 14 years now. We do it 4 times a year. And I ask that question of the project managers that attend that are commercial project managers from big firms across America. And currently, I'm still getting about half of the people that attend that saying, I've never seen a schedule in this format before. It just blows me away that we're not more familiar with this type of schedule. But anyway, it's in the flow chart. We're saying here that move on is going to happen before we can do the excavation, foundation, and site work. Excavation and foundation and site work must be completed before we can start doing the crane pad. The crane pad must be finished before we can do the crane setup. The crane setup we estimate to take 5 days. It could start as early as the end of day 84, in which case it'll finish as early as the end of day 89. Or the crane setup could start as late as the end of day 121, in which case it should finish by the end of day 126. If the crane setup is not finished by the end of day 126, it will delay the job and we won't finish on day 334. The crane setup has 37 extra days, or what we call float or slack time. Okay? So that's early start, early finish, late start, late finish, duration, total float, or slack. We have a key down here. Every schedule should have a key on it, a legend, like on a map, that tells you what's what the numbers represent here, because there is no one way of doing this. Everybody has their own way. Some people may put early start here and early finish there instead of early start here and early finish there, or upside down or whatever. So every schedule needs to have a key. The schedules that you create by hand in here, make sure they have a key on them or a legend, just like a map would, so you know what those numbers represent. Now, the S to S60 in here means that this excavation, foundation, and site work activity that's going to take 75 days to complete, after this activity starts for 60 days, then the lobby structure can start. That's what we call a start-to-start lag, or a start-to-start relationship. We start the excavation, foundation, and site work. 60 days later, we start the lobby structure. The default relationship, if there's not an S to S or F to F, is what we call a finish-to-start relationship. The crane pad is finished, and immediately the crane setup is started. There is no overlap here. However, with these activities, there's an overlap with that S to S of 60 in there. The F to F of 27 means that's a finish-to-finish relationship. The lobby structure finishes on day 134. 27 days later, on day 161, the lobby structure finishes. This S to S means the wall panels start 22 days after the tower structure starts. So the tower structure starts on day 126, we add the 22, the wall panels can start on day 148. 8 days later, the tower interior finish can start. The whole project should take us 334 work days. Okay? Now the triangles on this schedule represent a sub-network. This is what we would call a main network, or some people would call it a super network. And there's a sub-network. Sub-network number 1 tells us exactly how we're going to do the foundation and site work in 75 days. Sub-network number 4 is a separate schedule of the yacht club. The little yacht club schedule, in fact, was a larger schedule than the main net. It ended up with more activities to show how it was going to build this yacht club in 77 days. That kind of makes sense? So that's a sub-network, another schedule. The line that goes down the center here that's bolded is what we call the critical path. Notice on those activities there's no float. Those activities, the early start date and the late start date is the same day. The early finish date and the late finish date is the same day. There are no extra days. Whereas as compared, tower roof could start as early as day 161 or as late as day 305. There's 144 extra days in the tower roof. These critical activities have no extra days. They're what we call critical. They have to happen on those days. Does that make sense? So there's your critical path. If the guy that says he's going to do the excavation, foundation, and site work, and he agreed to do it in 75 days, if that activity starts 5 days late and doesn't finish until day 80, is that going to cause a delay to our completion date?
Yes.
Yes, because it's a critical path activity. If the excavation, foundation, and site work activity does in fact start 5 days later and finishes 5 days later, which activities is the management team going to look at in order to get back on schedule? Will it do any good to come down here and get the pool done faster? No. Well, what about getting the parking garage? Certainly if we get the parking garage done in 60 days, that'll make up for this 5 days, correct? No. Which activities do we look at? The lobby structure, the tower structure, the wall panels, the tower interior finish. If we want to accelerate some later activities to make up for this 5 days delay here, those are the activities that we look at. It would do no good to accelerate anything else. Does that make sense? Now, think back of any construction experience you've had or what we see frequently on jobs. We typically, if we had a delay up here at the first, the typical attitude without a schedule is, oh, we'll make that up somewhere. In fact, you don't even know you're behind because you haven't scheduled. Or with a bar chart schedule, and you still don't really think you're behind, and you get somewhere in this area, and then all of a sudden you have the vision that you're not going to finish on time. And so then you send a directive out to everybody working on this job. The landscape people, the paving people, the crane people, the parking garage people, the mechanical people, the tower roof, the lobby interior finish, the wall panels, and you send a directive out saying from this day forward, everyone will work 2 shifts per day, 7 days a week. We're going to get this schedule back on, this project back on schedule. So we accelerate everybody. Why do we accelerate everybody? Because we don't know who to accelerate. We don't know who's critical or non-critical. See, on a bar chart, the attitude is that every activity is critical. A bar chart doesn't show any extra days anywhere. With a bar chart that we've shown you before, if any activity gets off schedule, you think it's critical. You think you're going to be delayed. When construction experience tells you a lot of activities have extra days in it. A bar chart doesn't show it. A CFM logic diagram does show it. Does that kind of make sense? Say yes.
Yes.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Now, don't limit your use of CPM scheduling just to construction activities. We're not the only industry that uses this scheduling tool or this management tool. I've done consulting for a lot of manufacturing operations. I helped produce a schedule for a pair of Siamese twins that was going to be separated, and all the operations and the equipment that had to come in and go out. I was sitting in a church meeting with a bunch of high priests members of the state high council. And we were introducing a new missionary program, and it was getting real confused as to when you have the home teachers involved and when you involve the missionaries and all the full-time missionaries and the state missionaries, and was getting all confused as we were talking about that. And I got up on the blackboard and drew a CFM logic diagram of that process. Anything that you're working on that's a process that has one step or another step that has to happen before any other steps is a candidate for critical path to help you figure out how it's going to go. But anyway, there's our critical path. We can kind of see how the schedule comes together. And it forces us to think, and now we can communicate to everybody involved in that project. The tower roof can start as early as the end of day 161. It could be finished by day 174. It must be finished by day 318. If it's not finished by the end of day 318, we have a delay. That person pays the liquidated damages. Okay?
I'm trying to see, like on the tower structure, it says the early start date would be day 126. So wouldn't that be earlier? Because if you were to have an early finish date of like the crane setup.
Well, maybe this part of this lobby structure needs to be done also, because our relationship here is a finish to finish. In scheduling it, we just wanted to make sure the tower structure finished 27 days after the lobby structure finished. So according to our schedule, no, that's the earliest it can start is day 126. The crane setup, but we don't have enough lobby structure done where we can start doing the tower structure. Is this the situation?
So do you ask your subs how long they think it's going to take, and that's how you get your day amounts, or do you?
Your durations can come from several sources. How do we typically come up with durations today? Historical data is a good answer, but is that what really happens?
No. Somebody throws out a number.
You know, in all honesty, most schedules today, nobody even pre-thinks it. You know, there are a number of major projects that are built without a schedule at all. And the attitude is, we just work hard. We'll finish on time, we'll do it by working hard. You know, and that's why we enjoy a 70-hour work week, especially toward the end of that project, is it just takes that. You know, so if we schedule it out to come up with durations, there's a couple of ways. Historical records is very good. If you're measuring performance off the people you're managing, you know what their productivity rates are. If we do the quantity survey first, we know how many lineal feet of curb and gutter needs to be installed, and we know the daily productivity rate for a normal crew of installing curb and gutter, then it's easy to come up with the duration. Okay, so that's one way we could do it. Another way we could do it is go to our estimating manuals. If you look at Means and Richardson's and Walker's estimating manuals, they have productivity rates in them. So we can look at the estimating manual and see what our productivity rate is based on our quantities. We can come up with a pretty accurate duration. Another way of getting the duration is, as you mentioned, getting it from the subs. What are we trying to manage again? What's our objectives? Time, cost, quality, safety. How do we award contracts typically to subcontractors? Based on what? Cost. Based on cost, 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 and cost. Is there something wrong with this formula? We're trying to manage time, cost, quality, safety. We're awarding contracts on cost, 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 and cost. Ever think about that? How are you going to manage if you're awarding contracts on cost, 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 and cost, you really don't care about time, quality, and safety. I would say. Okay. Some people say, yeah, but how do you do that? How can you award contracts on anything besides cost? Because how are you awarded the project from the owner? Based on cost. So cost seems to be the driving force. Do you think it's possible that you could select a subcontractor that would give you the least cost that would end up causing you to go bankrupt?
Yeah.
Oh, happens all the time. Safety's a big issue. If that subcontractor has unsafe workers on the job site, I don't want him on the job. I don't care how good his cost is. if you've got a schedule, I don't care how cheap the cost is, you've got to have it done in that amount of time. If you can't do this tower structure in 35 days, I don't want to bid from you. Because liquidated damages on this hotel is $1.5 million a day. I can't afford that. I've got to have somebody that can get it done in that amount of time. Okay? So maybe we ought to start thinking about awarding contracts on time, cost, quality, and safety. How do we do that? Well, pre-qualify your people on safety. Know what their safety modification factor rate is. If you don't have this safety modification rate, don't give me a bid. Now, we can pre-qualify them on quality. You need to know the subs a little bit now. It's going to mean you're going to have to walk one of their past jobs, call up and check references, and things like that. But pre-qualify them on safety and on quality. If you don't do quality work, don't bother to give me a bid. Okay? Now, what if you don't get the job because you have those kind of work techniques in place? Good. Let somebody else use this sub and go broke. Okay? We have to minimize these risks that we're taking in this industry all the time. Now, how do we handle duration? I've pre-qualified on safety. I've pre-qualified on quality. I can judge cost really easy. We're used to that. Duration, handle it like cost. Tell your subs, give me a cost and a duration. I've pre-qualified you on safety. I've pre-qualified you on quality. I'm going to award the contract based on a combination of cost and time. That's one way to do it. Or the other way to do it is to give the sub the duration. If you've already scheduled it, you can say, okay, you've got 35 days to do the tower structure. Now give me a cost. I've pre-qualified you on safety. I've pre-qualified you on quality. And now the final judgment is a cost judgment because duration is the same for everybody. Does that kind of make sense? Somewhere you have to handle this duration problem. Some of the biggest conflicts that we create in construction is when we accept a bid from a contractor. Let's say we've got a drywall subcontractor, and he says, I can do the drywall for you in this hotel in 6 months. And we say, excuse me. He says, I can do the drywall for you in this hotel for $2.3 million. And we say, okay. And we award him the contract. And he was thinking that he could do the drywall for that cost in 6 months. And now we put together a schedule and we say, here's your schedule, drywall guy. You got 6 weeks. Well, could he do it in 6 weeks possibly? Maybe if he's a big company and he's got a lot of people and he puts everybody on our job at the same time. I mean, if you can build a home in 2 hours and 45 minutes or whatever it was, shouldn't you be able to drywall a hotel? If you can build an Empire State Building in 18 months, shouldn't you be able to drywall this hotel in 6 weeks? Well, yeah. But can we maintain the same quality level doing it in 6 weeks? No. Can we maintain the same safety level without some additional costs and problems? No. Can we maintain the same quality? No. But I can have it for you in 6 weeks. But now I need to give you a new bid. Because to maintain quality, costs are really going to go up, and to maintain safety, costs are really going to go up. So I can give you a new bid, and then I can do it in 6 weeks. Do you see the problem? We create that problem by not nailing down this duration in the contract period. My opinion is you ought to get an estimate from the subs, a duration as well as a cost. Or you ought to schedule it first and give them a duration, and then have them give you a cost. That's fair. And you, through your quality control check sheets, you can maintain quality. So anyway, good question. Any other questions on that kind of stuff? No, please.
I was just gonna say, at my work, we had the owner of Salisbury Homes come speak to us, and they put out homes every 40 days. That includes calendar days, not working days.
Yeah, they push the schedule really hard.
He said he never ever goes with the low bidder because he knows that their quality's not gonna be very good, and he knows that they're not gonna get one time. So he says, I'm all about quality. You know, the 4 things you said was pretty interesting. Very big, because you know they're doing 600-700 homes a year. You know, he started out with nothing. So,
You know, if we really believe that time is money, we made that statement earlier today, and everybody looked like you were convinced that time is money. And yet, we don't award contracts based on time. We only do it on money. you'll find many times that the duration is far more important to you than the cost if you start tracking it. And quality and safety is also more important than cost in many cases. I mean, I can think of company after company that's gone through terrible times because they didn't manage the safety aspects and the quality aspects of their projects. We have to look at all of it. We've got to, again, decrease the amount of risk that we take in this industry. And if we don't take care of those things, then you assume the risk. Okay, now the questions. Does this kind of make sense as a brief introduction into CPM scheduling? So we can kind of see how it's going to go through. So let's come back and look at our little outline here again. It is a flow chart that shows preceding activities, succeeding activities, and concurrent activities. Its advantages is it shows the dependencies between the activities. It identifies the critical activities. There's this little management rule, we call it the 80-20 rule. It was really discovered by a guy named Preto. It's called Preto's Law. If you take a good business management course, they'll talk to you about this 80-20 rule or Preto's Law. Preto was an accountant in Italy. And he found that 80% of Italy's wealth was owned by 20% of its population. And Preto, being a bean counter, thought that was kind of interesting. He was also, as the story goes, it's actually history, it's not just a story, he was an avid gardener. And being an accountant, he liked to keep track of things. And he found that 20% of his pea plants accounted for 80% of his pea harvest. And he got kind of tied up into this 80-20 rule, and he found it to be true in a lot of cases. Think about it for a few minutes. Have you ever been in a leadership position? Let's say you're an Elders Quorum presidency. I can almost guarantee you that 20% of the members of your quorum is going to count for 80% of your problems. You ever served in a bishopric? It's the same deal. 20% of the members of your ward is going to take 80% of your time on a counseling basis. If you run a construction project, 20% of your problems account for 20% of your activities account for 20% of your activities account for 80% of your problems or delays. The idea is if we can understand which activities are going to make the impact and we manage those 20% of the activities very carefully, that's going to count for 80% of our results. Okay? 80-20 rule. CPM scheduling tells us which activities to focus on. If we focus on those critical path activities, the rest of them just kind of flow along, and our project should finish on time.
So how would you be able to decide what the critical things to be?
How do we know what the critical activities are? We draw that logic diagram, and we go through the rest of the stuff we're going to teach you today. You'll be able to answer that question really well, hopefully by noon. Okay? So it does tell us those critical activities. It allows management to set priorities. You know where to set your priorities. It shows the effects of a change. If there's a change order, as we go through this project, let's say that the lobby structure has just been completed and the owner's there on an owner walkthrough, an inspection, and he looks at this lobby to his hotel, and there's a great big old post right there that he missed on the plans. And he says, hey, I can't have that post there. You've got to take that out. And we said, do you want us to put together a change order on the cost of removing that post? He says, sure. So we look around, we get our engineers here, we realize that if we beef up that post a little bit, and that post or that column a little bit, and put a bigger header across here, a bigger beam, we can support that and get rid of this post that he's complaining about. Okay? Now, what's that going to do to us from a cost point of view? We say we can do it for $5,000. And now, is that going to affect the schedule? The owner's time is to liquidated damages of $1.5 million a day. This is the MGM Grand Hotel. Okay? $1.5 million a day if we don't finish on time. Now, the owner wants to make a change in the tower structure. Or, excuse me, the lobby, whatever one it was I said. Was it the lobby structure? The lobby structure. It's going to delay the project by 2 weeks. It's going to take 2 weeks longer to get that lobby structure finished. Is that going to delay the job? Yeah. Because this activity can't start till that one's finished, and if that doesn't finish on day 134, we're not going to finish here on day 334. Okay, so that does delay the job. We don't need to go to a judge and 12 honest people to figure that out, a whole scam of attorneys. we can look at our schedule and see the effects of a change. Now, if the owner doesn't like that, then we can leave the post, or he can pay us additional money. If he still wants to finish on day 334, then we can accelerate the schedule by looking at that, and that activity, and increase the cost by shortening those down, and still finish on time, but now the change order is more. And we can negotiate that, and the owner can see it. And we don't need to go to court to figure that kind of stuff out. So it shows the effects of a change. What if there's a change down here in the yacht club? The owner comes along, the yacht club is almost done. We're on day 138. And the owner comes along and wants to make a significant change in the yacht club. It's going to delay the project by 3 months. Is that going to delay the project, for the whole project, by 3 months? Because the yacht club is delayed? No, it's got 164 days of float. Extra days. We don't have to have that yacht club done until day 306. Okay. So there wouldn't be an extension of time because of that change, but there would be because of that change. So we can really see the effects of a change. And if anything changes, the rest of the dates are automatically calculated. You don't need to rethink it. If an activity gets ahead, all the rest of the dates are automatically calculated, as you'll see in a few minutes. And you don't have to rethink it through like you do a bar chart or a check sheet. Right?
Is it hard to get your subs there if you were ahead of schedule? Is it hard to get your subs early?
Yeah, what we find is if we're ahead of schedule, if we start things a little quicker here and we start getting ahead of schedule, it's really tough in most schedules to take advantages of getting ahead. Because we've already contacted these subcontractors, hopefully weeks ago, months ago, to tell them the schedule. So if we get a little bit ahead, and let's say this elevator could happen on day 150 instead of day 161, it's pretty tough to get that guy to be there earlier. Here we don't really care because he has a lot of flow. But let's say the tower structure starts a little bit earlier, so we're going to finish a little bit earlier so the wall panels can start earlier. It's tough because we've already told the wall panel guy he'll be there at the end of day 148. So when you get ahead, it's hard to mobilize the later activities and get in there quick enough to take advantage of it. But when you get behind, it always affects it. You know, so it's possible if people can respond quick enough that we can get ahead of schedule. But it's tough. You know that from your experience. Our biggest problem is general contractors who called the night before expecting us to show up the next day without a schedule. Here, we can notify people way ahead of when they're going to be on the job. Other questions? Okay, let's take a look at our sheet again. Shows the effects of a change. It's adaptable to any project, simple or complex. Some construction companies feel like that you don't use CPM scheduling unless it's a $5 million project or more. That is old thinking. That's back when CPM scheduling was really difficult to understand and do. I know of a lot of home builders that will not start a home without a CPM schedule. Okay, it's easy to follow visually. You can visually see what's going on. It is the most effective scheduling system. It's ideal for computers. We can analyze different methods or sequences of construction. It's useful for court cases. In fact, it keeps you out of court because we can see the cause of the delays. It serves as a basis of systems control. It's great at creating teamwork because everybody can see when they have to happen and what's going to happen and when. Disadvantages. It can become complex. It is a sophisticated system. It does require training to become an effective user of it. It requires tremendous commitment to make it work. And because of its complexity, it's often neglected. You have to recognize those disadvantages and figure out how to overcome them. Okay, now how do we put a schedule together? First of all, you gather information. You get the plans in your head. Look over the plans and specifications. Get an idea of the magnitude, the methods of construction. What restrictions do you anticipate? What's the scope of the subcontractors? What special delivery problems do you anticipate? You think the project through. Interview key management personnel. This is an absolutely critical step. I've done way too many schedules where the owner sends me a set of plans and I put together a schedule because the contract requires a CFM schedule in Primavera. So they'll send me the plans, I'll put a schedule together and I'll send it back up to them. I did a project like that for a hotel that was built up in Idaho. It was not a hotel, it was a high school campus. And it was a 2-year project. And so the owner called me up and said, hey, I've got this schedule I've got to have. The owner requires a CFM schedule in using Primavera. If I send you the set of plans, would you do the schedule? And I said, sure. So I put together the schedule for the construction of this high school campus. Sent it up to the general contractor. They sent me a check back and a letter of praise and appreciation. I was up in that area about 8 months later, and so I stopped by the job site. And I walk into the job site, and the superintendent was glad to see me. The project manager, oh, Jay, thanks so much for that schedule. That was such a help to us. Now, are they following my schedule? Are they using it? Well, actually, they were using it. As I pulled onto the job site, I had to use the bathroom, so I went inside the little porta potty there, and I noticed that it looked like somebody had backed a backhoe into the top corner and made a chunk out of it. And they had taken one of the pages of my schedule. I printed my schedules out on vellum, and they took one page of my schedule and taped over that hole in the porta potty. So I knew that my schedule was being used. Okay? That was all it was used for. I go inside the office and I say, hey, are you using my schedule? And I'd like to compare what you're doing with the way I schedule it. How close are you to my schedule? And the project manager says, hey, Bill, where's that schedule that Newt did for us? Gosh, I don't know. They looked around for it for a while, couldn't find it. Finally, they found it in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet. Pulled it out, blew the dust off it. We opened it up. Were they building this project the way I'd scheduled it? Not at all. I mean, being a construction guy and having taught high school shop, what was the first building I had scheduled to be built? The shop and ag wing. The administrative wing of the principal's office and all that that was the last one I was scheduling. I did the lunchroom second because to me that's pretty important. I got the gym done and the football field. That was a pretty high priority to me. The English wing, well, that was the last classroom wing that got done. Have you got the idea? You know, I mean, how many correct ways are there to build a high school campus? Which building do you do first? They had chosen to do the administrative wing first because the principal said, you will do the administrative wing first. I'm going to be in there in the middle of the summer getting ready for school, and I really need an office. Okay? Just the opposite in my schedule. I didn't care about the principal. He can work at home for all I care. You got the idea? It's not used at all. The only value that schedule had is it met contract requirements. Now, that same company calls me up again a couple of months later. They say, Jay, would you do a schedule for me? I say, sure, be glad to. If you send down your project manager and superintendent. They said, can't do it. Those guys are real busy. They're finishing up that last job. Please, please, please. And I said, nope, won't do it. And I gave them names, a couple of other people that scheduling consultants could do the job for them. They call me up another week later and say, hey, we need to schedule in 2 days to turn it into the owner. Please, please, please do it for me. I say, if you send down your superintendent project manager. I met the project manager. They still didn't bring the superintendent. Met the project manager, Salt Lake Airport, driving down here. We worked on the schedule intensively for 24 hours. It was now his schedule. He was telling me the way that he wanted to build the project, and we put the schedule together. He goes back up to Idaho with the schedule under his arm. They call me up a month later and say, can you update the schedule for us? Sure. They give me the actual start, actual finishes. I updated the schedule. We did that on a monthly basis. Now, are they using the schedule? Yes. What's the difference in those two scenarios? Now it's their schedule. They have the ownership of it. As long as you hire a consultant to do your scheduling, all you're going to do is meet contract requirements. Some of you are going to be hired as schedulers when you graduate out of this program. You're going to find yourself in the same position. They're going to hand you a set of plans and say, here, put a schedule together. You're going to be foolish if you do. You're going to fail. You've got to involve the people that's going to run the job. Should be a team effort. You've got to involve not just the superintendent and project manager, but the prime subcontractors as well, if you really want to make it a teamwork project and make it successful. Anyway, make sure that you involve the field people that are running it. Discuss the overall job approach, the most important areas, the problem areas that you anticipate. Check with the estimator. The estimator has already mentally built this project when they did the estimate. Take advantage of that thinking, that study, that skill level that the estimators has. Discuss the degree of control. This is tough. How detailed do you break this project down? Let's say it's the construction of a house. Do we have one activity that says frame? Or should we break frame down into more greater levels of detail? Should we say frame floor system, frame exterior walls, frame roof, and then frame interior petitions? Or is it really better to frame the floor system, the exterior and interior petitions, and then the roof? Which is best? All interior, exterior walls, then roof, or exterior walls, then roof, then interior walls? Which is the most correct? What do you think? Well, we can argue about that all day. The correct way is the way that team wants to build it. That's why you got to have their input. I personally like to get the roof on and then do the interior petitions. Because I put the petitions in, I can plumb them up and make sure they're all tied together well. Other people say that's stupid. I want the interior petitions in first because then I can walk on them as I put the trusses up. Well, that kind of makes sense too. But it needs to be done the way that that team wants to do it, is what we're trying to say here. Or do we go into a greater level of detail? And do we, instead of saying frame the floor system, do we say pick up the mud sill and set it on the foundation? Mark the location of the foundation bolts. Drill a 5/8" hole. Apply sill sealer. Pick up mud sill and set on top of foundation and sill sealer. Put a washer on. Put a nut on. Torque it at X number of pounds. Well, obviously that level of detail is ridiculous. But somewhere between that ridiculous level of detail and one activity that says build it is the correct level of detail. And you're going to struggle with that level of detail. Try to get detailed enough in your activities that gives you control, that tells you who is doing what, when, and where. Try to get detailed enough in your activities to solve the anticipated problems. For me, I've already told you a couple of my weaknesses. Window wells. I have an activity in my schedule that says order, deliver, and install window wells. Window screens. I have an activity in my schedule that says install window screens, so I don't forget those anymore. So schedule to the level of detail that corrects your typical mistakes and gives you control of the project. It's tough to know how detailed to get there. That's about the best advice I can give you on that. Now, you break the project down into activities, at whatever level of detail that gives you control. As you break it into activities, I'd recommend that you use an action, verb, an object, and a location. You don't just say footings. You're building a big project, which footings? If you're a home builder, the footings on which house? You're building a whole subdivision. You're not just scheduling a house. Which footings are to be installed? And what's the location of the footings? And you don't just say footings, you say form footings, reinforce footings, inspect. You've got to get the action verb in there. Now, if you want it to be all of those, because maybe you have one contractor, one sub, that's going to form, reinforce, inspect, and pour and strip the footings, then I would recommend you communicate that by saying FRIPS. Footings. Form, reinforce, inspect, pour, and strip. Some schedule, this will be one activity. Other schedules, forming footings is one activity. Reinforcing footings is another activity. I mean, you just struggle with that level of detail. But you think that through and come up with a schedule, but remember the action, verb, and the location as well. Keep contractual divisions separate. Keep trades separate. Those two usually go together. You may even want to separate crews, showing where one crew is working throughout the project versus another crew. Keep the field work separate from the shop or office work. Does the submittal and delivery of materials ever delay construction projects? Studies show 80% of your delays are because of not having the right materials there at the right time. The submittal process. Well, maybe we ought to include the submittal process, the ordering and delivering and approval of materials as part of our schedule. This level of detail, again, you're just going to wrestle with. Things that are commonly left off the schedule, you may want them on, you may not, but think about it. Time required to bid, especially on fast track buildings or fast track projects or design build projects. The shop drawing review process that we just mentioned. The lead time on materials, especially the delivery and the shipping time for materials that's manufactured in factory somewhere. Curing time of concrete. It's typically not a cost, but it's a time issue. Okay, when I think of curing time of concrete, is it Mountain Terrace? That's the housing right up by the temple, the rabbit hutches they call them. Okay. What? Do you know how those were made? You know how they were constructed? Any ideas at all? Those were constructed with what we call a lift slab technique. They poured all of these columns and erected all these columns up throughout that project. And I was a small boy when that was done. My father was working on that project as an iron worker. And so I had a chance to go over there a couple of times. And they had all of these columns in the air. And then they poured the floor slab on the ground. And then they poured the ceiling, the next floor on top of that floor slab. The next floor slab on top of that. And the roof slab on top of that. So they were all on the ground. That eliminates all that shoring in a concrete building with extensive 2x4 shoring under there to hold the floors up while they cure. They all cured on the ground. They put reinforcing steel in it and post-tensioned it. After the concrete cured, they stretched those steel cables tight. Then they put a little jack on top of each post with a cable that would come down that would hook to the first slab, which would be the roof slab. And all these little jacks, I was over there one day when they were jacking it up, and these little jacks made this tick, 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 ticking noise. And it was just a ticking, they were lifting the slab up. They were all interconnected together so that if one little jack got behind, all the others stopped while this little jack kept ticking. And I remember sitting there was a little jack over on a column over here, and everybody else had stopped, and then it would still go tick, 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 tick. And then as soon as it got caught up, you'd hear everybody else go tick, 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 tick. It reminded me of being on a scout hike. Have you ever been on a hike and you've been a little bit behind because maybe your pack's too big or something, and you're a little bit left behind, so everybody else sits down and takes 5, and as soon as you get caught up with them, what do? Buggers get up and move on, and you don't get a break. That's the way that little jack was. But anyway, they're jacking this slab up in the air. Once they get the slab up in the air, they put a collar tie around it, and all the collar ties, and then it's in place, and they run the cable down and lift the next slab up. Tie it in place, run the ties down, lift the next one up. Can you visualize that? That's how those were made. I don't see much construction like that anymore, but about 5 years ago there was a school in Florida being made that way. It was a 12-story building. They jacked up the ceiling slab. It was running the cables down, hook up the next slab to it to jack it up when the ceiling slab broke loose. It wasn't up to strength. They didn't have a thing in the schedules that said cure concrete. Okay? Concrete wasn't up to strength. That slab fell. Okay? The guys working around the perimeter, as that slab came down, the air pressure blew them out of the way. The guys that were in the center, they became really short. Killed 18 guys. One project. I think of a water tower in West Virginia that was built. It was a circular structure. And it was slip forms where they formed it up, poured the concrete, raised the formwork, poured the concrete, raised the formwork, poured the concrete. That's the same way the towers were done on the football stadium. If you look at those round cylinders on the football stadium that has the elevator or whatever inside for the folks that go up in the sky boxes. Anyway, they're the same way. You can see the formwork marks where that was slid up. They plastered it. You can't see them as well as you used to, but anyway, that's how those was formed. Well, in this cooling tower in West Virginia, they jacked it up. It was up about 28 feet tall, and they were pouring concrete, and they raised the formwork up, and they were pouring concrete, and a couple of snap ties broke loose, which the scaffolding was attached to. Okay, and when that form tie broke, what happened to the tie on both sides of that? It's now taken the load of the scaffolding and stuff, and they snap, and then the next one snap, and it's like a domino effect. You've got these guys running around getting ahead of the scaffolding as it's collapsing, and where is there to run to? 35 people killed on one accident. 3 generations. That was a family construction company. You were killed, your son was killed, and your dad was killed. Okay. And what was the problem? Oh, just curing concrete. Okay. So think about the time it takes to cure concrete. Consider that curing. Okay. You might want to consider a work breakdown structure. A work breakdown structure is where you break the project down into phases and subphases as you kind of think it through. For example, we have the pre-construction phase. The way that this would be developed would be first pre-construction phase, then you would think engineering phase. You wouldn't think of the detail yet. Then you would think job mobilization phase, site preparation phase, foundation phase, structure phase, exterior finish phase, interior rough-in phase, interior finish phase, exterior phase, finish, that kind of stuff. Then you come back and you break it down into an additional level of detail. This activity, our work breakdown structure number 1 was pre-construction. So 1.1 is the first activity under pre-construction. 1.2 is the second activity under pre-construction. We come down here to job mobilization, which is our third phase. 3.1 is set up field office. 3.2 is install temporary power. If we want to break our field office into an additional level of detail, we will number it 3.1, time it to set up field office. 0.1, the first activity in setting up the field office. That work breakdown structure number would become the activity ID number when you input it into the computer. Anyway, some people like to go through this little process before they start developing that logic diagram. Okay? Anyway, then the next step is to create the logic diagram. There's 2 types of logic diagrams. There's one that's called activity on arrow, where we write the name of the activity on the arrow, and the other is activity on node, where we write the activity on a node. The activity on node is certainly the most common today. The activity on arrow method has almost become a dinosaur. I will show you one example of an activity on arrow schedule in a today later, so you kind of compare the two. But activity on node is really the way to go, and that's the way that ShortTrack and P3 and Microsoft Project use. So that's where we're going to spend our time. Now we have a couple of definitions or rules of construction. The name of the activity is written in or on the node. In this case, I have a square node, and I've written in it Frips Footies. That's the name of the activity. This square or rectangle is the node. The hotel project had round nodes. The name of the activity was written above it. Doesn't matter, but we have the name of the activity written in or on the node. Whereas the activity on arrow one, we put the name of the activity on the arrow. We would have a node, we would have an arrow, and write the name of the activity on the arrow. I shouldn't have put a box around that. We write the name of the activity on the arrow. With activity on arrow, this is a beginning node, this is an ending node. The activity is the arrow. With activity on node, the node becomes the activity, and we write the name of the activity in or on the node. That'll make sense a little bit better when we get into it. But anyway, the arrow shows the relationship between the activities. The logic must be exact as to preceding, succeeding, and concurrent activities. And best scheduling practice show only one beginning node and one ending node for activity. There should be no dangling nodes. So to clarify that a little bit, let's give you an example. Here's a project that consists of 3 activities: form, reinforce, and pour. Now, since we have 2 beginning activities, my rule said best scheduling practice would show a single beginning activity and a single ending activity. And since I have 2 beginning activities, I'm going to put an activity here or a node and just call it begin or start or something like that to give me one beginning activity. Then after a start, we can form and we can reinforce. Form and reinforce are concurrent activities. They're going on at the same time. Form is a predecessor to pour. Reinforce is a predecessor to pour. Pour is a successor to form and to reinforce. Kind of makes sense? It's fairly simple, but that's what we mean by predecessors, successors, and concurrent activities. So, and that logic should be accurate as far as predecessors and successors. Now, from that little introduction, I would like you to put together a schedule of A preceding B and C. B and C are concurrent. Okay, just take a minute with your notepad or little free space you got, or borrow a sheet of paper from somebody else, or draw on one of the margins of the book or whatever, and draw a schedule of A preceding B and C. B and C are concurrent. Even though it sounds kind of simple, do it anyway, just to make sure you've learned the technique. A precedes B and C. Okay, could I do it like this? Is this correct? Why not? That says A precedes B and C. B and C are not concurrent. So, could I do it, it doesn't matter whether your nodes are circles or rectangles, could I say A precedes B and C? Is that correct? No. B and C are individual activities. If B delays the job, I want to be able to see the effects of that and not tie them together. So they should be separate activities. So then, is this then correct? That's better, but what little best scheduling practices have I overlooked here? One ending node. Here we have two ending nodes. In the early CPM scheduling software, if we would try to input this into the computer and have the computer do the calculations for us to come up with the dates, we'd get a little message to the screen that would say calculations aborted, dangling nodes. Okay, the software now has been written a little more user-friendly, and when you do this, it, unknown to you in its software, it's written where it creates an ending activity that simply ties them together. And, finish, done, whatever you want. But now we're meeting best scheduling practices. We had one beginning activity, that makes sense, and we put a finish activity or an end activity here to make sure we tie them together with an ending activity. That kind of makes sense? A precedes B and C. Could I have done it this way? Is that correct? Yes. This has nothing to do with the alphabet. Okay? We're just using ABCs here. I tried to teach this using real construction activities, but we'd end up with large, big discussions about, well, where I'm from, we do it this way. Where I'm from, we do it that way, and all that kind of stuff. So it could be A, B, C. That's still correct. Does that make sense? Okay. Video person, can we have you shoot over and just catch this so that the people that are going to have to suffer through this thing in the future is able to see this? So we could have A precedes C, B, and N. It could say A precedes B, C, and then finish, or whatever we want to call it on the end here. And both of those say the same thing. They're both correct. Make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Let's do the next one. A and B precede C and D. C and D precede K. Draw. One beginning node, one ending node.
Are A, B, and C concurrent?
this a lot more fun than estimating? I'll be honest, isn't this a lot more fun than estimating? What do you have when you have 3 attorneys up their neck in concrete? Not enough concrete. Did you hear about that plane load of attorneys that was hijacked yesterday?
No.
The terrorists have announced this morning, I picked it up just on the news as I come in, that if we don't meet their demands and turn loose one of those prisoners every hour, that they are going to turn loose an attorney every hour. Come on, I'm laughing at that. You know that in America, there's one attorney for every 360 people. That's the ratio of attorneys to the general population. In Japan, there's one attorney for every 10,000 people. In Washington, D.C., there's one attorney for every 10 people. Those are true statistics. Now, the question that begs itself from that is, why does D.C. have the most attorneys and New Jersey has the most toxic waste dump sites? New Jersey had first choice. A and B precede C and D precede K. Got it? Okay. So I have to have A and B preceding C and D. So I'll say A and B precede C and D. Okay, and then C and D precede K. So, is that correct? No, and why? Because best scheduling practices, I mean, we don't really have to do this today, but it really is a good scheduling practice that I'd recommend you get in the habit of. Because once you've input this into the computer, abiding by this one beginning node and one ending node gives you a way to really check your logic to make sure you haven't made a mistake very easily. So to abide by that suggestion, we'll have a start activity here first, and now showing A and B precede C and D, and C and D precede K. Now, B could have been up here, A could have been down here, that wouldn't have made any difference.
But, like, don't you have to have a middle node in the middle? Because right now it says that once B is done, you can move on to C without getting A done. And that's not true according to what it says.
No, this says that we've got to have A done before we can do C.
But it says that once B is done, you can go to C.
Since I have 2 arrows coming into C, I can't start C until both A and B are done.
Okay.
Okay, if there's an arrow coming into it, it means that prior activity must be done first. So I've got to have both A and B done before I can start C. I've got to have both A and B done before I start D because it has 2 arrows on it. And I've got to have C and D done before I can start K. If C is done but D is not done, I still can't start K. Okay? That's the way we look at the logic. Now, another way that we could have drawn this with this little mess in the middle here is manifolding those arrows together. We could have drawn this like this, and that's telling us the same thing, due to this common area, that A precedes C and A precedes D. Most people prefer the other way because then they count the arrowheads a little easier. But now, B precedes C, B precedes D. So either way of drawing it is great, doesn't matter. Question back in the back. Question.
Are A and B, are they concurrent then? Could you have A before B, then B, all in a straight line? A, B, C, D?
Has nothing to do with the alphabet.
Right, I know.
Okay. Yeah, here we have A and B concurrent.
Do they have to be concurrent? Say concurrent.
No, it doesn't say that they are, but it doesn't say they're not. As we put a schedule together, you usually think of what has to happen before something else can happen. You don't think about something having to be concurrent typically.
So my schedule would be correct if I had A, A before B, then B, C, D.
If you had this,
Yeah.
okay, now, if you have preceding.
What if you just?
You don't think of multiple steps back. When you're putting a schedule together, you're not thinking, let's see, I need to have the foundation done before I can lay carpet. Okay? You're only thinking of immediate predecessors. So you're saying here that A precedes B, well that agrees. You're saying B precedes C, but you've got some.
Say that A has to precede B, and that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, our logic up there doesn't say that A precedes B, nor does our logic up there say that C